Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I always had the idea of being an MEP one day and even chairing a committee, so I never succeeded. So it's going to be an opportunity. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
I see if I succeed in chairing the IB one day.
It's great to be back, and we met recently in the plenary on the greening the EIB issue. That was a few days before we took the crucial decisions at EIB, and then we met with this committee indeed immediately before Paris COP21. So a little bit long stretch in between, but it looks like always we have afterwards been succeeding in taking some influence on the COP deliberations, and I hope this will be the case in Madrid as well this year. So I'm grateful to Pascal Caffin to giving me the opportunity here today. Last week, this House adopted a resolution declaring a climate and environment emergency. I fully concur with this assessment, and on the urgency to act, the IPCC clearly indicated the years to 2030 as our last window of opportunity to avert catastrophic climate change. This is also true, and I mentioned this deliberately, for the protection and biodiversity and ecosystems. This will be center stage in Kunming, Yunnan, in October 2020, so next year, so we better prepare for that and have just as ambitious objectives as we have for the climate summit. I believe we can address the climate crisis head-on, but we must act rapidly and work together. And since the meeting we had in the plenary a few weeks ago, development has taken place in the bank that has surprised everybody, including us in the leadership of the bank, because we knew it would be a difficult way in view of the fact that 28 member states do not necessarily always have congruent ideas, and certainly not on a difficult issue like this one. But at the end of the day, we succeeded to get an enormous majority, both of the represented capital and the votes, and I'm very grateful for that. This has been accomplished by our services, but in particular by three vice presidents of the bank. Andrew McDougall, who is sitting here, has been the one who has been working endlessly on the new energy lending policy of the bank, which included, of course, the move out of fossil fuels. And I wouldn't want to imagine what kind of resistance he has been meeting there. Emma Navarro, the vice president, is the one responsible for climate, so she normally should be here with us, and she will be with you at your disposal whenever you want to talk climate with her. But she is in Madrid already today, so apologizes. And Ambroise Fayol, he, of course, is the one who combines strong ambition on sound and green finance with climate ambition, and has been, let's say, very much pushing the issue in the bank. So I thank them all, and if I may, Mr. President, if there are questions which go far beyond my remit or in my understanding, then I might include the two gentlemen into my responses. As last week in its resolution for COP25, this House welcomed the EU bank's increased ambition on climate action and environmental sustainability, and I thank you very much for this recognition. You cannot believe how well this is registered by 4,000 of staff in the bank. It's important, very motivating. Indeed, on 14th of November, the EU bank decided to make a quantum leap in its ambition. Your bank, the EU bank, will stop financing unabated fossil fuels energy projects and will launch the most ambitious climate investment strategy of any public financial institution anywhere. And I'm convinced, after the experience of Paris 4 years ago, when we were the driving force behind the multilateral development banks, that also this time we will be in the lead vis-à-vis others. Others will follow. Our new targets are clear. First, we will increase the share of climate action and environmental sustainability financing to 50% of our business by 2021. By the way, some people sometimes say EIB should become the climate bank. It's not in our name, but we are the climate bank of the European Union for decades. We are by far the strongest climate project lender in the world, by far, and we intend to further work on this. We had roughly 15% of climate lending 10 years ago. In Paris, we committed to go up to 25%. We are now at 27%, and we'll go to much more, as I will say in a few minutes. Because by 2020, we aim to support no less than €1 trillion of investment in these objectives globally by 2030. I was a little bit shaky when I announced that figure in the General Assembly of the United Nations, because that was before we met, and that was before I got the approval of the organs of the bank, so it was a little bit on shaky ground. But at the end of the day, we did it. Third, we will align all our financing activities with the principles and goals of the Paris Agreement by the end of 2020. This is an important part of the program, because if we commit to do 50% climate lending, then you must not be allowed to destroy with the rest of your 50% lending the objectives you have reached with your climate lending. So doing 50% with a good conscience and 50% with a bad conscience is not the solution. This also implies the urgent need to have clarity on the funding side. Green bonds is an issue frequently raised. We invented green bonds 12 and a half years ago at EIB. We were considered lunatics at that time. Not me, I was not there yet, but our predecessors. They were very courageous at that time, and we had an outstanding partner in the Stock Exchange of Luxembourg, one of the most dynamic places for these activities. But what became very clear very soon is that you need clear rules for what is a green bond. You cannot simply take a piece of paper, paint it green, and say this is a green bond now. No, the investors you need to bring on board. They need to know what you're doing with the money they entrust you. And therefore, there must be transparency, accountability, and sustainability. And this must be checked. And there must be international criteria. What is green? There is the working group on green principles, which is to a large extent influenced by our experts. They have come very far. But I agree with the European Commission that it's necessary to arrive at a solid framework for this in form of a taxonomy, which makes sure that green cheating stops. Greenwashing is a risk for our credibility, not only vis-à-vis the citizens. This is of course the case, because then they might not believe in climate policies anymore. It's a huge credibility risk vis-à-vis the investors, and they act quickly. If they don't trust us anymore, what we do with their money, we have a problem. So these decisions send an important signal to the world. They prove our determination as Europeans to send a strong message in Madrid that the EU is the global leader in the fight against climate change and is committed to continue to be so by stepping up its action. And that also means, ladies and gentlemen, that by quickly developing the necessary technologies, also by technology leaps, we will be the front runner in the development of the necessary technologies for the entire world. At a time when Europe loses competitiveness each and every day because we don't do enough on innovation. We finance 1.5% of our GDP less in innovation activities over 15 years now, compared with our Asian and North American competitors. So we must move forward on this as well. So climate policies, that's not charity, that's a good opportunity to develop markets as well, and we should grab this opportunity. In this context, the Bank is looking forward to working with you and the European Commission, and of course the Council, to implement the ambitious vision of the European Green Deal. I believe the EU Bank is central to realizing the EU climate neutrality ambition. Investment will be crucial to achieve the desired objectives, but public resources are scarce. The EU Bank, through its ability to mobilize private investment and its capacity to provide advisory services to make projects bankable, is ready to play a key role in the future Sustainable Europe Investment Fund. We are also ready and look forward to bring our advisory services and financing power to to support the European Commission Just Transition Mechanism. The EU Bank is well aware of the fact that the transformation required to meet the Paris Agreement goals will affect some areas, communities and sectors more than others. We commit to increase our support for a just transition in the most vulnerable groups and regions, ensuring that no one is left behind. Our new energy lending policy already proposes some measures in this regard, such as the development of an energy transition package, which includes the possibility to exceptionally finance up to 75% instead of normally 50% of the eligible project cost for new energy investment in countries hit hardest by the transition. However, the issue of a just transition is much broader than the energy policy. It is not only about renewables, not only about energy efficiency, it's also about the provision of new economic perspectives, growth and jobs. Because definitely in the fossil fuel industry, for instance, jobs will get lost. And these people need new jobs. And you don't convert somebody who has been working in a coal mine for 20 years into the head of a digital startup in 2 years. So it takes a real effort to get there, and we are ready to contribute to that as well. Let me explain to you in more practical terms how we plan to deliver on our new ambition. The EIB Group, that is the bank and the fund, our subsidiary, is currently working on a roadmap, the Climate Bank Roadmap 2025, to deliver on the EIB Group ambition over the period of 21 to 25. We are happy to present this in due course to this House. The EU Climate Bank Roadmap 2025 builds upon and reinforces the EIB's existing climate strategy, which is currently also undergoing a review. Since being approved in 2015, significant progress has been made on the EIB climate strategy implementation and on delivery of our commitments made in Paris 4 years ago. We need to work extremely closely with the EU institutions in Brussels and Strasbourg, because it is quite obvious that the activities of this bank always consist of work in the triangle between lending, which is normal for a bank, blending, that's the grip on EU resources, which we need to have, and advising. Lending, blending, and advising belong together under one roof. And this is why we need the close cooperation with you and the European Commission, and of course with the support of the Member States, when it comes to the future of the EU budget. And there we must know what is in the Green Deal and the Just Transition Package. So far, it's a programmatic name, but we need to find out in the next weeks, in our very close cooperation, in particular with Vice President Timmermans and his team, but also to talk with President von der Leyen last night. We must get our forces together in order to achieve that, because, you know, when we all talk about this vision, some people get nervous because they think you might need a psychiatrist if you have a vision. But what we need here is to bring flesh to the bone, and that's the work for the next week, to make it a little bit more tangible what is meant by the Green Deal and the Just Transition Fund. And I can assure you that we are in very, very close exchange with the European Commission on this. Thank you very much for your attention, and later on we'll be ready together to take all your questions you might have. And if we are not able in the limited time we have today to answer and respond individually to each and every question, we assure you that you'll get the responses afterwards. Our colleagues from the Brussels and the Luxembourg offices are here. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's check if it works. It seems to be working, so. Seems to be working. Okay, so we start with the coordinators or the representatives. So start with the EPP, Peter Liese.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you, President Hoyer. You mentioned the sentence at the end that a former Social Democrat German Chancellor said, if you have a vision, you should go to a psychiatrist. I think we need visions. however. I think it's good that Ursula von der Leyen has a strong vision of a climate-neutral Europe, and that you support that. I think your remark meant that we shouldn't remain with a vision, we should actually help people. The topic of just transition is very important for the EPP. And we do indeed have to put more flesh on the bones for people who have lived from coal hitherto. I have two specific questions. Last week we supported the transformation of the EIB into a climate bank by a large majority. You said rightly that the EIB won't support unabated fossil fuels anymore. If I understand that correctly, it means that we see a possibility for CCS, carbon capture and storage, that this technology will be supported. Second question, there was some unclarity as to gas as a transition technology in combination with renewables. I think in certain countries that will be necessary. That isn't the goal for 2050, but looking at the current situation in Poland, going from a lot of coal to very little gas with renewables is a very good investment, and I hope that you will continue to support that. Thank you.
So for SND, Jutta Gutteland. Now, Mohamed Shaheen.
Thank you, Dr. Werner, Dr. Hoyer. Thank you for your introduction. We as S&D welcome, of course, the transition from the EIB into partly, at least, a climate bank. We were a bit considered what you mean with low emission gases, but that's something that Peter Liese also asked, and also what you said about that the investments in the investments in fossil fuels are acceptable if they're unabated. So there's a discussion currently in Parliament about the green taxonomy, and as you said, that 50% of the investments of the EIB will be put into green investments, and 50% will be left for other investments, but there you will really check whether those investments go against the Paris agreements or not. So my question is, would you approve or would you promote having, besides a green taxonomy discussion, also a clear definition of brown taxonomy? And would that be helpful for the investments of the EIB, of course?
For Renew, Nis Torvalds.
Thank you, Pascal, and excuse me for having a voice which is more like an old raven than a human being, but that's life. On the slope down to CO2 neutrality, we have different technological, material, scientific, organizational, intellectual, state-dependent bottlenecks. They look different for transport and for buildings and for different fields of industry. And they have usually also different investment cycles. And you have in the background, and you have different conditions of biodiversity. And the bank should be able to, in some way, to accommodate all these different aspects. It's like a kaleidoscope which is turned by time, and when time turns that kaleidoscope, the picture becomes very much different. And my question is therefore very simple. How do you cope with all these very severe and sometimes contradicting facts? Thank you.
Thank you. For the Greens, Jutta Paulus. No, we change. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Hoyer. Indeed, we also, we Greens, we believe that this is a big step in the right direction, but we have some questions on the exact implementation of what you're doing. So the first thing you already touched upon is you spoke about this roadmap, and maybe you can explain a little bit more what you mean? What are the next concrete steps to implement your goal of reaching 50%? And what are the timelines for the revisions of other sectoral lending policies, for instance, in transport? Then it would be interesting to understand what do you exactly mean with aligning with the Paris Agreement objectives. There is the do no harm principle. How will you apply this do no harm principle? And when it comes to lending for gas, there is the forced PCI list that is still being funded. The funding will continue until 2024, I understand. You will continue funding the transition to gas heating systems. So my question to you is, don't you think that you're adding a risk of stranded investments in the portfolio of the EIB? How do you assess this? And how do you define low carbon gases? There's not yet a clear definition of what it actually means. And will this, like, low carbon gas definition, will it actually lead to continue financing fossil gas? And then you spoke about the climate strategy, and that you are also revising the climate strategy of the EIB. Maybe you can explain a bit more what are the concrete steps and goals and objectives of revising the EIB climate strategy. Thank you very much.
Thank you. For ECR, Alexander Vondra.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. President. I would have a specific question, but can also serve as a general one. I tried to raise this at a plenary a couple of weeks ago when your collaborators were here, but I did not get any kind of a response. I'm from Prague, Czech Republic, so it's a traditional crossroad, you know, heavy traffic connecting Berlin with Vienna, Frankfurt with Warsaw. We did not have finished a highway ring around, so it means that Prague is totally jammed by the trucks from everywhere, by other cars. And we do have a municipality which is led by, in fact, the Pirates, who are part of the Green Party here. And they promised the EIB financing for completing the ring around Prague. And here is my question, because if this ring is finished, it would dramatically improve the quality of, would reduce the air pollution in the capital of my country. At the same time, it would not contribute to the Paris goals by anything. So the cars would go just around. So improving the local air quality, but not contributing to the global one. In the new transformed EIB, can we have a lending of the money or not? And in the general sense, you know, any type of this kind of investment, whether it would be eligible for EIB financing. Thank you.
Thank you. For ID, and sorry for the switching, but we didn't have you on the list, Silvia Sardone.
Non è un problema.
No problem. Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Hoyer. Mr. Hoyer, I read that you were intending to invest €1 trillion up to 2030. That was the figure that the EIB has planned to spend in the light of this climate hysteria that seems to have taken over the European Parliament now. The only real tool to stop all these people dying around the world, apparently. Here's my question. If, as Greta Thunberg says, there's this emergency and this risk of mass extinction, how is it possible to take public investment out of the picture of this emergency? Let me explain what I mean. If you're saying we're all going to die, this is a real priority, how do you manage at the same time to ensure that the budget is respected? Not all the member states
of course, there are good and bad pupils there, but just dealing with the climate crisis, what you're creating, the new climate fund, is just the latest of many bubbles in the financial sector. You seem to be pursuing the interests of major investors and banks rather than protecting citizens' real needs in Europe. So can you explain to me how you reconcile this will to tackle the possibility of us all dying because of the climate getting worse every day, while at the same time you're rapping the various member states on the knuckles for every tiny cent they might spend to do something about it?
Thank you. The last coordinator, Silvia Modi for the GUE.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Hoyer, for your introduction. In the big picture, it's a very good thing that you've made this decision about supporting fossil-free investments. So we have one source of financing working against the climate targets. The timetable is very tight. We have public procurement and public investments in the member states that go against the climate targets. So that's wasted money. I have two questions. One on gas, which a colleague raised, and the second is on energy efficiency. You talked about the targets for 2050, which is the overall target. We think the 2030 target is the most important one. We should show a roadmap how we're going to get there. Otherwise, it'll run away from us. We talk about the Union being a pioneer, but the targets are not yet based on science, and we're not at the right level yet. What we've heard about the Green Deal and the Green Economy package, it still doesn't offer targets that are ambitious enough. And that's being the case, we can't call ourselves leaders. So I wanted to ask about gases. What are low-emission gases? Do you think, really, that CCS is the solution? I don't think the large-scale solutions are yet available. So what are low-emission gases? Wouldn't it be more sensible to switch straight to clean, truly renewable energy sources? Natural gas might be a transitional solution. My second question is on energy efficiency. That should be supported. But what are the criteria to make sure that the investment on energy efficiency take into account the entire life cycle in terms of the life of buildings and the life cycle of materials?
So if you allow me, we will go directly to the other questions. Otherwise, you won't have the time to answer. Okay? So I close the list here. I have around 9 additional speakers. So please stick to 1 minute for your questions. Otherwise, you won't get the answers. Okay? I'm sorry about that. It's your success. But then we have a voting session and we have to be on time. So let's start with the EPP again. And Madam Maria Spiraki.
Thank you, Chair, for giving me the floor. Thank you, Mr. Hoyer, for having you here in this very interesting debate. I would like to ask you very briefly 2 questions. First, in my home country, Greece, we have 2 regions in transition. The one is the region of Western Macedonia, and the second is the city of Megalopolis. I would like to ask you kindly and frankly if you have any kind of suggestions to the local authorities in order to start providing a new eligible project for the EIB. And second, it is the question concerning the use of gas as a transition fuel. I would like to ask you at the same framework, if these regions in transition could use gas or could use gas with the facilitation of EIB in order to facilitate the transition. Thank you very much.
For SND, Sylvia Spurek.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Together with approval of the new EIB energy policy, on November 14th, the EIB Board of Directors approved a new strategy that includes the gradual increase of the share of its financing dedicated to climate action and environmental sustainability to reach 50% of its operations in 2025 and from then on. So far, EIB has had a target of 25% dedicated to the climate action projects only, and this last increase, up to 50%, is not only in percentage, but also in the scope, as it includes not only climate action dimension of projects, so horizontal perspective, but also environmental sustainability, which is a separate sector of projects, vertical. Within existing methodology of the bank, it is not possible today to count how this target is reached. So my question is, what is the new precise target for the climate action and what will be the methodology to count it? Thank you very much.
Thank you. For Renew, Jan Uitema. He's not here, so Martin Osix.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you for the presentation. Very interesting. I would like to ask how this lending policy, which I think is a really great step forward, could contribute to what I would call the leapfrogging in the Central and Eastern Europe. I come from the region, and it's often very dependent not on just the fossil fuels, especially coal, but it's also very heavy on industries and energy-intensive industries. And I wonder if this energy lending policy could help to kind of overcome the technological gap and kind of move it into what I call the renewable age. Thank you.
For the Greens, Ita Paulus.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Hoyer, for being here. And I would like to here I am. Actually, I'm thanking you explicitly for mentioning Kunming, because I think the biodiversity crisis is, compared to the climate crisis, it's somewhat overlooked. And I would be very interested in what kind of projects would the EIB like to finance in that policy area, or do you think of financing conservation projects or agricultural projects which are enhancing biodiversity, or are you thinking of projects like greener cities with biodiversity spots in the city? I would love if you could enlighten me a bit on this. Thank you.
Thank you. For ECR, Anna Zaliuska.
Panie Przewodniczący, Panie Prezesie Banku, Szanowni Państwo, dziękuję za to spotkanie i chcę zadać kilka pytań. Rozumiem, że Europejski Bank Inwestycyjny...
And I have a few questions. The bank that you direct is an independent body which has a legal personality, which manages public and private money. My first question is as follows. Cooperation with the Commission, which we hope to see present directives soon.
What?
Apparently there is an interpretation problem.
My colleagues are giving you this.
To pierwsze pytanie.
So now on to my first question. How will cooperation with the Commission work? How do you imagine this? You are managing colossal amounts and so I would expect to hear more tangible and precise information from you. I would like some more concrete elements from you. And my second question regards gas. We are worried, indeed, by rumours that the bank is preparing to refuse funding of projects linked to gas. This particularly worries me because Poland has invested a lot in projects linked to gas. Thank you.
For the GUE, Mike Wallace.
Thanks, Chair. Dr. Hoyer, your final policy retains the revised provision, which was not in the original draft, which will allow you to pump money into liquid natural gas projects like the one in the Shannon Estuary in Ireland, which will see us import frack gas from America and lock us into this for decades to come. Your Vice President, sitting on your left there, Andrew, said recently in an interview that EIB will continue to lend to fossil gas projects after 2021 as long as they meet strict emission standards. Can you elaborate on this point, please? Your policy also says, in general, the bank will only support power generation projects which emit less than 250 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. But the Commission is working on a draft sustainable finance taxonomy. As part of this process, it sought input from a technical expert group. According to the experts, gas-fired plants would not qualify as a transition activity because they emit more than 100 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour of electricity produced. 100 grams is the threshold defined by the expert groups to qualify as making a substantial contribution to climate change mitigation. So your 250 figure is 2.5 times what they're allowing. Can you please explain this, please?
Thank you. For the last three speakers from EPP, Madam Benteler.
Ja, vielen Dank, Herr Hoyer, für Ihre Einführung.
Thank you, Mr. Hoyer, for your introduction. To what extent is the EIB giving loans for climate projects outside the EU? And to what extent do you see an increase in these measures against the background of the fact that in the European Parliament we've decided that measures for development aid for climate and environmental protection measures should be doubled in the next Parliament, and of course because it makes sensible to make environmental protection international, and perhaps we could make a greater contribution in that way.
Thank you. For SND, César Werner.
Gracias, señor presidente. Buenos días, señor Hoyer. No le he oído hablar.
Good morning, Mr. Hoyer. I haven't heard you say anything about biodiversity. Are you planning to invest in natural solutions to tackle climate change? Now, in your CV, you've made safe investments to make sure you can keep the AAA rating. That's what private banks do. I'm rather surprised by that attitude on what's supposed to be a development bank. And so, how do you envisage reconciling this obsession with maintaining a AAA rating while also making green investments, which we so sorely need if we're to provide some impetus for a new socio-economic model, even if some of those investments may theoretically be less financially secure than traditional investments?
Jan Huitema for Renew.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Hoyer, for being here. I just have a very short question. Let me start over. The small and medium enterprises, I think, are the driver for innovations and can be a very valuable solution also for climate change. How can we make sure that also money spent from the European Investment Bank goes to the right people and also goes to, for example, small and medium-sized enterprises? Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, if I can ask you to answer all these questions precisely in a maximum of 15 minutes, that
15.
would be great. Yeah, 10, minimum of 10, maximum of 15. Okay? And then we close.
Thank you very much, Chairman. This is a generous offer. I know how precise the European Parliament is on time limitations. This is quite a bouquet of questions, and I will not be able to answer all of them, so be sure and remind us if we don't do it that you get the response individually from our Brussels office here. But in general, the scope of the questions, including the last one we just heard, on SME, for instance, shows the spectrum of activities which are expected from the bank. So we are a climate bank, we've said, and we will be even more one. We are the climate bank for a long time. And climate will get more and more center stage. But at the same time, we are expected to produce jobs via SMEs. At the same time, we are expected to fight against the loss of productivity and competitiveness vis-à-vis our trading partners by investing much, much more into innovation, our biggest weakness. And at the same time, we are expected to contribute to the vision and ambition to be a global player and have, in that context, a strategic autonomy. For me, one of the most important ambitions raised in the recent months and years. So we need to contribute to that. So that means we have different sets of objectives: climate, innovation, growth and employment, and a few others. And you must make sure, in order not to drown in this set of ambitions and objectives, that you reconcile objectives which might seem to be contradictory. Take an interesting example in our neighborhood, Western Balkans, an area which we should give much more attention to. In the Western Balkans, you can see those countries with which we cooperate, which do combine the move towards the European Union, which is a special way of cohesion policy, with innovation. Those regions on the Western Balkans who are particularly ambitious on innovation are the most successful in moving towards the European Union, at least economically. So this shows we must reconcile our ambitions. And therefore, we say, or as we said in the United Nations General Assembly, just as well as in Paris recently, and we will do again next week in Madrid, there must be climate in everything we do. And that means we are to make sure that we do not undermine our climate successes with the other part of our business. That is difficult, because sometimes that leads to wrong conclusions. I believe that in a world where we want to be an economic power and technological leader, we will imagine, what a bad word, we need roads. We need rail, we need air, we need ports. This will remain the case. But it must be done on a sustainable scale and way. So this is why we are not dreamers. We believe that the successes in climate and nature preservation activities must be done with the highest ambition of technology and innovation. And therefore, the question concerning our business outside the European Union was particularly interesting for me, because there you can really see what quantum leap or frog leap development means. And sometimes, as was said, I think the colleague was from Poland, that is true for the intra-EU situation as well. We have areas where we need frog leap development. In Africa, it's evident. It's so highly motivating. If you go, let's say, to Cameroon or to Ethiopia, where you see that the arrival of the cell phone has revolutionized societies by bringing access to information, to health information, to insurance, to banking activities, to regions where the access to a bank outlet is impossible. And this has triggered an enormous increase of activity, economic activity of SMEs, very small businesses, micro business, in particular with women who so far did not have access to markets at all. So these are developments who make a huge difference. And what a blessed Africa is nowadays, that after having been neglected for so long time, nowadays they do not think to invest into a copper cable-based telephone system. They move directly to mobile communications. That's happening. That's happening at a big scale with our support. But we can do as much as you allow us to do. You, as members of the European Parliament, but also our shareholders, the member states of the European Union. And so far they were hesitant to go to more than 10% of our lending outside the European Union, in particular in developing countries. I believe that must stop. After the migration crisis, and unfortunately it took the migration crisis, the Europeans have woken up on development challenges. They see now what it means in Africa when Africa grows to 4 billion people by the end of the century. So it's time to think development not in terms of charity or donor recipient thinking, but in terms of strategy. And that requires we must think development big. So development is another area where we must make sure that our objectives fit together. And it goes without saying that any development project we support in Africa or in Latin America or the Eastern neighborhood, all important, need to meet the standards which we apply to environmental acceptability within the European Union as well. So, of course, it guides us in our activities outside the European Union. Second part I would like to refer to is the issue of stranded assets that has been mentioned. This is key. I mean, some people, also in our community here, have very much goodwill and sometimes even ideological approach on climate policy. I don't have that at all. I want a clean environment and I want the nature to survive, but I want to do it with high tech. And therefore, I want to invest into assets which I do not need to write off too soon from a bank. That's a purely professional view. If you see, you go into an investment that has a lifespan of 40 years, and you know in 15 years that's over, then it's pretty irresponsible banking. And you can imagine I discussed that thing with the heads of the biggest commercial banks in Europe and insurance companies who we need for co-financing, and they say the same thing. Are you crazy to go into these kinds of assets if you know you have to write it off soon? So from that point of view, the issue of stranded assets forces us to be more cautious, because otherwise the need for writing off, that is making losses for the bank, lands with the taxpayer of the member states of the European Union. That is not the choice. Third issue I want to address explicitly life cycle thinking. Indeed, we have a gap here, but this goes in general. We in Europe do not invest enough from the beginning when we go into an infrastructure project for the foreseeable maintenance and rehabilitation of that project necessary in order to reach the end of the lifespan of this project. So that leads to a built-in deterioration of the quality of the infrastructure asset, and then can come to certain disaster. And the bridge that collapsed in Italy could have collapsed in any other part of Europe as well. So don't get things wrong. This is really important to think long-term and also in terms of maintenance and rehabilitation. And by the way, in some parts of energy, also about removing certain assets one day, which will be extremely costly. Then my last comment, and then I leave it to my colleagues, Ambroise for transport, and in particular the energy questions to Mr. McDowell. I would like to say one thing on Kunming. We are very ambitious there, and we had a very good preparatory conference for Chile, or now for Madrid, with the Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate in the Vatican this year with the Pope. Extremely ambitious and encouraging event. And there it became clear how important for all of us Kunming will be. And that means for us that we concentrate even more on what we're already doing in countries outside the Europe, particularly reforestation. Agriculture is more and more important. Our ambition on oceans was expressed by the initiative on clean oceans, which we undertook 2 years ago together with AfD from France and KfW in Germany. So these, and ECO is now on board as well as BGK. So we're going to develop these things further, and we go to Kunming with an ambitious agenda, and I'm anytime ready to report to the European Parliament before we go there. And if I may, Andrew McDowell, maybe these are the most compelling questions.
Okay, starting with energy.
Thank you. Quite a number of questions on the role of gas in our new energy lending policy, and one question on energy efficiency. Just on the role of gas, I mean, we should be clear, the energy lending policy does not completely reject the role of gas in the energy transition. What it argues is that in line with EU climate and energy targets, the gas sector itself needs to be decarbonised, needs to be abated. Particularly for a bank, if we're to finance assets that risk being overtaken by new technologies and becoming stranded assets, we want to make sure those projects use the best available technologies to decarbonize themselves. So we do recognize the role that low carbon gases can play, particularly as a backup to renewable energy and the deployment of intermittent solar and wind power in the energy transition. I suppose that brings us to the question of what is the definition of low-carbon gases. What we propose in the document is that for power generation, that new power generation using all available technologies, but including gas, must meet a new emissions performance standard of 250 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. That compares to our current standard of 550 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. Now, to our knowledge, the only way gas-fired generation projects can meet that standard is in one of three ways, using current available technologies. One is combined heat and power, where the surplus heat from power generation is used to heat water, mainly for district heating systems. That's an extremely efficient technology, and it reduces the emissions associated, obviously, with energy production. The second way of doing it is through the blending of renewable gases, biogas, synthetic gases, and ultimately in the future green hydrogen, into the mix used for gas-fired power generation. And that again is a way to bring the emissions performance down below the 250 standard. And the third way, as has been suggested, is through the combination of carbon capture and storage with gas-fired generation. Now, we recognize these technologies are expensive currently. They're quite immature, most of them. And that's why we have signalled that we are in a position to blend low-cost EIB debt with grant aid under the Modernisation Fund, the Innovation Fund, and indeed from national resources, to bring these technologies, to make it much more commercially interesting for the promoters. We were also asked the question, why the 250 standard as opposed to the 100 standard under the Sustainable Finance Taxonomy? Now, let's recall the Sustainable Finance Taxonomy is about the definition of green finance. It is about projects that make an extremely positive contribution to climate action and the other environmental objectives. The 250 standard is about Paris alignment. And don't forget, Paris alignment is a slightly lower standard of do no harm. It's not saying you're making an extremely positive contribution, which is what's required for the label of green finance. It's just saying you are doing no harm with the 250 standard. And that's why there's a difference between the 250. So if we finance power generation, renewables mainly, that meets the 100-gram standard, we can finance that with our green bond issuances. On the other hand, if we finance a combined heat and power plant that only meets the 250 standard, it's still Paris aligned, but we can't label it as green finance. And just finally, on the energy efficiency question, I think this is an extremely interesting area. I think this is the area, perhaps, that's been most overlooked in the energy lending policy, because this is the area, I think, that offers the greatest potential for much higher levels of EIB financing in line with the climate and energy targets of the European Union. And we all know the numbers of a requirement of about 200 billion investment a year in the building stock in order to meet those targets. Our requirement is that up until the end of 2020, any new building we finance obviously must meet the near zero energy requirement. Past 2020, when that requirement becomes obligatory, we need to set a new standard. And I think this is a work in progress for the bank together with the European Commission. And that new standard, I suspect, is not just going to focus on the operating efficiency of the building. It's going to have to focus indeed, as the questioner asked, on the life cycle efficiency, on the embedded carbon performance of the building, as well as other criteria over the lifetime of the asset. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we are close to the 15 minutes and we are running late now. So thank you very much for coming before the Parliament and before the NV Committee. We got your point about Kunming. Okay, so it means that you might receive an invitation before Kunming so that you can explain to this House and to this committee what will be your biodiversity strategy before Kunming. So, and we are going to vote precisely on this topic in a couple of minutes. So thank you again to you, Mr. President, and to your team, and see you soon.